The Queen Who Chose Mercy, an alternative ending. The bells rang across King's Landing. Cersei's army had surrendered. Victory was complete. Daenerys Targaryen sat on her dragon above the Red Keep, watching the city that had cost her everything. Missandei was dead. Jorah was dead. 2 of her dragons were gone. Her claim to the throne had been challenged by the man she loved. Every advisor had betrayed or doubted her. The fire burned inside her. All she had to do was say the word, Dracarys. One word and the city would burn. One word and everyone who ever doubted her would turn to ash. But then she heard it. Not the bells, something else. A child crying in the streets below. The moment that changed everything. Daenerys looked down at King's Landing. She saw what Cersei had hidden behind those walls. Not soldiers, not enemies, people, mothers holding their children, old men who had survived too many wars, families huddled in fear. They looked exactly like the slaves she had freed in Essos. In that moment, she remembered who she was. Not the Mad King's daughter, not the queen who takes what is hers with fire and blood, but the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons who had once stopped her entire army to save one child from a warlock. Grey Worm watched from below, waiting for the command. Jon Snow watched from the ground, his hand on his sword, praying she would make the right choice. Daenerys closed her eyes. She thought of Missandei's last word. Not Dracarys, as many believed she meant, but Nakalos in the common tongue, mercy. When she opened her eyes, the fire inside her had transformed into something else. Not weakness, but strength. The strength to break the wheel, not by burning it, but by showing the world a different way. She flew Drogon down to the steps of the Red Keep. The city held its breath. The trial of Cersei Lannister. Cersei Lannister stood in chains before the throne she had fought so hard to keep. For the first time in her life, she had lost everything. Her power, her army, her illusions. Daenerys could have killed her instantly. Grey Worm demanded it. The Northerners demanded it. Even Tyrion, her own brother, believed she deserved death. But Daenerys did something no one expected. She gave Cersei a trial, a public trial where every crime would be laid bare, where the people of Westeros would see the truth of what the Lannisters had done. The trial lasted 3 days. Witnesses came forward, survivors of the Sept of Baelor, families destroyed by Cersei's wars, former servants who had seen her cruelty firsthand. Cersei stood silent through it all. She offered no defense, no apology. She was guilty, and she knew it. On the 3rd day, Daenerys pronounced judgment. Not death, exile. Cersei would be sent to the ruins of Casterly Rock, stripped of all titles and power, to live out her days as a common woman, alone with the ghosts of everyone she had destroyed. Some called it mercy. Others called it a fate worse than death. But Daenerys called it justice. The Great Council. Jon Snow stood before Daenerys in the throne room. The secret of his parentage had been revealed. Aegon Targaryen, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. The lords of Westeros waited for what would come next. War between aunt and nephew? Another generation lost to succession disputes? Daenerys looked at the Iron Throne, the symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she had lost, the throne that had corrupted everyone who ever sat on it. She made her decision. "I don't want it," she said. The room fell silent. Daenerys turned to face the assembled lords. For 300 years, this throne has been passed down through blood and violence. Children have murdered fathers. Brothers have killed brothers. Dragons have burned the innocent, all for this chair made of melted swords. She walked toward the throne, Drogon following behind her. "My ancestor built this throne to intimidate and rule through fear. I came here to break the wheel, but you cannot break the wheel by sitting on it." With a single word, she commanded Drogon to melt the Iron Throne. The dragon fire consumed it, melting it into a pool of liquid metal. The symbol of absolute power transformed into nothing. The lords gasped. Some shouted. Others stood in stunned silence. "Westeros will never again be ruled by one person," Daenerys declared. "Jon Snow has the better claim by birth, but I have the better claim by right of conquest, and we both have seen what power does to those who hold it." She proposed something radical: a council of lords from each kingdom, elections, representation, a system where power would be shared, not hoarded, where the people would have a voice in their own governance. It was messy. It was complicated. It was imperfect. But it was better than the wheel. The new 7 kingdoms. The transition was not easy. Some lords refused to accept the new order. The Iron Islands rebelled. Dorne threatened to secede. The North demanded independence. But Daenerys and Jon worked together, not as monarchs, but as mediators. They gave the North its independence under Sansa Stark. They granted Dorne greater autonomy. They listened to grievances that had festered for generations. Tyrion became the first chancellor, chosen by the council. Sansa ruled the North with wisdom. Arya sailed west to explore new lands. Bran became the keeper of history, ensuring the mistakes of the past would not be forgotten. Daenerys did not rule from a throne. Instead, she traveled across Westeros on Drogon, seeing the land she had fought for. She visited villages destroyed by war and helped rebuild them. She listened to common people, not just lords. She learned their names, their stories, their hopes. She became not a queen, but a servant, not a conqueror, but a healer. The choice that defined her. Years later, Daenerys stood on the cliffs of Dragonstone, watching the sun set over the narrow sea. Jon Snow joined her. Their relationship transformed from romance to partnership. They had both given up crowns to save a kingdom. "Do you regret it?" Jon asked. "Giving up the throne?" Daenerys thought about the question. She thought about all the voices in her head that day above King's Landing. The voice that screamed for vengeance. The voice that demanded fire and blood. The voice that sounded like her father. And she thought about the voice that had won. The voice that sounded like the girl who had freed slaves in Astapor. The voice that remembered mercy. "I almost became the thing I swore to destroy," she said quietly. "I almost burned a city full of innocent people because I was hurt, because I was angry, because I thought the throne would make the pain stop." She turned to Jon. "The Mad King's daughter would have burned them all, but I chose to be Daenerys Stormborn instead. I chose to be the woman who breaks chains, not the woman who forges them." The legacy. In the alternative timeline where Daenerys chose mercy, Westeros changed forever. The absolute monarchy ended. The wheel was broken, not through fire, but through choice. It was not perfect. Democracy is never perfect. There were still conflicts, still compromises, still difficult decisions. But no longer did the fate of millions rest on the sanity of one ruler. No longer did succession mean war. No longer did power corrupt absolutely. Children across Westeros grew up hearing 2 stories about Daenerys Targaryen. The first was about the warrior queen who conquered cities and rode dragons, the fearsome conqueror who brought armies to their knees. But the second story was more important. It was about the moment she chose not to burn King's Landing, the moment she had absolute power and chose to give it away, the moment she proved she was stronger than her worst impulses. That second story inspired generations. The price of mercy. But mercy came with a cost. Grey Worm never forgave her for sparing Cersei. He took the Unsullied and sailed to Noth, disappointed in the queen he had followed across the world. Some former slaves in Essos felt betrayed. They had believed in the Dragon Queen who answered injustice with fire. They did not understand why she would show mercy to Cersei Lannister when she had shown none to the masters of Slaver's Bay. Daenerys carried this burden. She knew her decision would be questioned. She knew some would call her weak. She knew she had disappointed those who wanted vengeance. But she also knew something else. Vengeance is easy. Mercy is hard. Anyone can destroy. It takes courage to rebuild. Jon Snow's choice. Jon faced his own decision in this timeline. With the throne destroyed and Daenerys alive, he had to choose his path. The North wanted him. The Night's Watch no longer needed to exist. He could have claimed power. He could have ruled. Instead, he chose exile. He went beyond the wall with the wildlings, not as punishment, but as purpose. He helped them rebuild their society. He became a bridge between the free folk and the kingdoms to the south. Some said he ran from responsibility, but Jon knew better. He had been brought back from the dead for a reason. That reason was not to sit on a throne. It was to protect those who could not protect themselves. In the true North, beyond politics and power games, Jon Snow finally found peace. Bran's vision. Bran Stark saw many possible futures. In most of them, King's Landing burned. Daenerys became the villain. Jon killed the woman he loved. The wheel continued to turn, crushing generation after generation. But in one future, one slim possibility, Daenerys heard a child crying. In that future, she made a different choice, and that choice created ripples that changed everything. Bran could not tell anyone about the other timelines. He could not reveal how close Westeros came to total destruction. But he recorded it all in his chronicles, so that future generations would understand the weight of the choice Daenerys made. One decision, one moment, one word not spoken. That was the difference between tyranny and hope. Drogon's freedom. With the Iron Throne melted, Daenerys made another choice. She did not keep Drogon chained to her will. She gave him freedom. The last dragon in the world was free to fly where he wished. Sometimes he stayed with Daenerys. Sometimes he disappeared for months, flying over distant lands that no human had seen. People reported sightings of a dragon over Asshai, over the Shadowlands, over places from legends. Drogon became a myth again, as dragons were always meant to be. But whenever Daenerys needed him, he returned. Not because he was bound, but because he chose to. That was true power. Not domination, but mutual respect. The conversation that never happened. In the original timeline, the one where Daenerys burned the city, Jon Snow had to kill her. Their last conversation was a tragedy. Love destroyed by madness. Hope destroyed by fire. But in this timeline, they had a different conversation. After the council was formed and peace was settling over Westeros, they stood together on the battlements of Winterfell. "You saved me," Daenerys said. "When I was about to become the monster everyone feared, you were there. Your love reminded me of who I wanted to be." Jon shook his head. "You saved yourself. I was ready to stop you if I had to, but you made the choice. You heard those bells, and you chose mercy." "I heard a child crying," she corrected. "I heard Missandei's voice in my head. I heard the slaves I freed in Essos. I heard everyone who believed I would be different." She paused. "And I heard my father's voice too, telling me to burn them all. That voice was so loud, Jon, so tempting. It promised relief from pain. It promised power." "But you didn't listen," Jon said. "I almost did," she admitted. "I was one word away from becoming him. One word away from proving everyone right who said I was my father's daughter." Jon took her hand. "But you didn't, and that's what matters. You broke the cycle." The Song of Ice and Fire. In the original prophecy, the Song of Ice and Fire referred to the battle between life and death, between the living and the Night King. Jon Snow, the joining of Stark and Targaryen, ice and fire, was meant to save humanity. He did that. He united the living against the dead. But the prophecy had a second meaning that only became clear in this alternative timeline. The Song of Ice and Fire was not just about fighting enemies. It was about fighting yourself. Fire is passion, power, rage. Ice is restraint, reason, mercy. The song is the balance between them. Daenerys was all fire. She could have let that fire consume everything. But at the crucial moment, she found ice within herself. She found restraint. She found mercy. That was the true song. Not conquest, but balance. Not power, but wisdom. Not the throne, but the choice to walk away from it. Tyrion's redemption. Tyrion Lannister had failed Daenerys repeatedly. His strategies had failed. His faith in his family had been betrayed. He had doubted her at every turn. But when she chose mercy, when she refused to burn the city, Tyrion finally understood. She was not her father. She was not the Mad Queen. She was exactly who she claimed to be. As Chancellor, Tyrion spent the rest of his life serving the new Westeros. He wrote its laws. He mediated its disputes. He used his clever mind not for games, but for governance. On his deathbed, decades later, he said, "I have served 3 monarchs, Joffrey, who was a monster, Cersei, who was ruthless, and Daenerys, who could have been a monster, but chose to be a hero. History will remember her choice above all else." The final scene. 20 years after the bells of King's Landing rang, Daenerys stood in a rebuilt city. It was no longer King's Landing. It had been renamed. The people called it New Aegon, after the first Targaryen conqueror. But this time it represented not conquest, but unity. She was older now. Gray had touched her silver hair. The weight of years and choices marked her face, but her eyes still held that determined fire. A young girl approached her, not afraid, not bowing, but curious. "Are you really the Dragon Queen?" the girl asked. Daenerys smiled. "I was once, but I am just Daenerys now. My mother told me you could have burned the whole city, but you didn't. Why?" Daenerys knelt down to the child's level. She thought about the answer, about the voice of her father, about the sound of bells, about the crying child she heard that day. "Because mercy is not weakness," she said. "It is the hardest choice a powerful person can make. Anyone can destroy. It takes real strength to build." The girl nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing the importance. As the child ran off to play, Daenerys stood and looked at the city she had almost destroyed, the city that now thrived, the people who now lived free. She thought about the Iron Throne, melted into nothing. She thought about the wheel, finally broken. And she knew she had made the right choice. The end. In the original ending, Game of Thrones showed us that power corrupts, that the cycle of violence never ends, that heroes become villains when they claim absolute power. But in this alternative ending, we see something different. We see that the cycle can be broken, that heroes can remain heroes, that the hardest battles are fought not against enemies, but against ourselves. Daenerys Targaryen's greatest victory was not conquering Westeros. It was conquering herself. It was hearing the voice of madness and choosing sanity. It was having the power to destroy and choosing to build instead. That is the ending that would have shaken the world, not with fire and blood, but with mercy and hope. The Dragon Queen who chose not to burn the world. That is how legends are truly born.